Running. Um, Thank you everybody for coming. I think there's probably a few people left to join us, so we are recording this as well. Just to say, this is a bit of a special, which I'm really grateful to Jodie for. As you will all be aware, we were going to have a learning and teaching conference in June, and at the moment, due to circumstances, that's been postponed and probably till October half term, and we will be delivering that remotely by the looks of it. But what we did ask, and what I got asked to do, was to go through the conference proceedings and possibly pull out those submissions that had a bit of a tail bent, that fitted quite nicely into the current agenda about just illustrating how we can do things remotely and online, stroke digitally. So we've got a program of extra webinars actually coming up between now and kind of at the end of June with some of those conference speakers. And I'm really glad and very pleased that Jodie very kindly has put her head above the parapet and very kindly offered to run the first one. So Jodie, thank you very much for putting this together and offering to do it. It is greatly appreciated. We've got an attentive audience today, and like I said, we video it so it will have a bigger view across the university. Jodie, I think, is on for about half an hour or so there's plenty of time for questions as we actually go through. I am recording it, so can I just start for a little bit of etiquette? Could I possibly just get you all to mute your microphones so we're not picking up any background noise when Jodie's speaking? And I will turn mine off. Jodie, I've got to disappear for 2 minutes, builders. Okay, so I will turn my mic off and.
Okay. All right then. I'm just going to crack on. Like I said, it's not going to be an hour. It'll probably be about half an hour, and it's just about sort of giving you a little bit of an idea about what we're doing in our department. And I'll give you a bit of context as we go through. Can everybody see my screen at the moment? Yeah.
Good, Jodie. Yeah.
Yeah, looking good. Lovely. Okay. So just to sort of give you a little bit of background, this is a 5 digital steps, to enhancing employability. And essentially, this has come from my previous job. So I worked in a further education college in South Wales, and I only started at the university last August. So I've actually been with the institution for less than a year. And in that time, quite a lot of things have sort of occurred to me, and I've just been promoted to the course leader for childhood and youth studies in the education department. So I've got a little bit of an overview about things that we can start changing, or things that we can start doing that don't necessarily mean massive changes, but can really enhance the student experience. So what we're going to be doing is having a little bit of a focus on employability for our students by using ePortfolios. Now, we're definitely not the first sort of department or anything to do ePortfolios. I know a lot of people are doing them in different ways, but we've come from a very people first, a very student first, where we've looked and we've problematized what a lot of our students are saying about leaving in year 3 and not necessarily remembering what they've done for 3 years and what they can put in their job applications, and problematizing maybe things like looking for student volunteers and not really having any form of intrinsic motivation for them to do certain things. So this is why this has come about. So to give it a little bit of context, like I said already, I'm the course leader for the BA in Childhood and Youth Studies in the Education and Sociology department. And that also includes the Childhood and Youth Studies with Criminology strand as well. So I've got quite a lot of diverse professional experiences that happen as part of work placements. And because of my background, which is outdoor adventure and further education, there's a lot of unique experiences that students are having that I can't necessarily professionally relate to, especially in terms of criminology, because it's not really my background. However, with this sort of routine that we've come up with, where students create ePortfolios and then they build those ePortfolios using sort of a facilitated structure that we've come up with, we've sort of got a bit of a one-size-fits-all, but with some real potential for them to completely personalize their experience, which in my current sort of research interest, which is digital pedagogies and use of digital technology in learning, the personalization of digital experiences is absolutely paramount. and ownership is even more important. So that's something that's governed this in a big way. So welcome to my workshop, 5 digital steps to enhancing employability. And it's essentially the ongoing contribution by learners to digital e-portfolios for employability, but to create a tangible record for seeking employment on completion of their degree. I've had a couple of year 3s come up to me just sort of in January time when they're looking at applying for jobs or graduate schemes, or especially we have a lot of students that go to get into youth work, and they sit down with a job description or a job application and they say, there's so many things that we've done in our degree and so many theoretical underpinnings for practical experience, and I've got to the end of year 3 and I don't really know where to start. So this is almost like a way of having a lifelong learning or an e-portfolio or some almost like a record of achievement that students contribute to throughout all 3 years of their degree. So when they get to the end, they have this tangible thing that they can take with them. So these are the sort of the learning outcomes. We're going to discuss the idea of a competency-based e-portfolio for undergraduate students. You can probably tell that I work in education with this incredibly structured learning outcomes communication. Identify the importance of a school-wide approach, which is something that we've found is really important, especially when we are asking students to go beyond their learning programs. And then we're going to look at the next steps of the digital e-portfolios. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Bett conference in the Excel Centre in London. I went to a couple of really good workshops this year in January. It feels like last year, but it was definitely this year, where the communication development of e-portfolios, there were some really good ideas about how this can be put into a little bit more of a digital economy and how we can start showing employers that our students have got digital skills without actually having to say it. So that's probably why sharing with employers and enhancing applications is so important in this process. So this is the way we problematized it. I think especially from my perspective, coming from the outside in, where I was doing this with my PGCE students in the college in Wales, is how can students reflectively measure achievement, employability skills and experiences throughout their degree without having to sort of go above and beyond. Okay, I think what's happening is we need to take those opportunistic moments where students are having almost a bit of a light bulb moment, or they're having a really strong reflective discussion, capturing it and then giving it a little bit of an employability spin where we can say, right, if you're in a job interview, that piece of learning that you've just done is going to be incredibly valuable. So it's really introducing that lifelong learning element. And largely, I think the main thing is that we're not getting students to simply tick a box, get their assessments done, get their grades, and just have a grade profile. Because qualifications are something that we absolutely need to work towards. However, competency-based CVs and competency-based skills are also such a huge part of employability, whereas students don't necessarily understand how to capture that if they don't have a formal qualification. So that's one of the way we problematized it. And what motivates students beyond their assessments? I know that we have a lot of initiatives in our department where we want students to get involved and represent the school, and we want students to get involved and be student mentors or to be part of our consolidation week activities. But they won't do those things because they are very tight for time. We completely understand our students come from a variety of different backgrounds, but also because they don't necessarily see the value in investing that time, because there isn't necessarily anything that they can evidence from it. Aside, I think, some department made up certificates, which I think the students ended up finding quite funny, which isn't really necessarily what we wanted. So that's the first, one of the second question, sorry. And then, bear with me. And then what incentives can be intrinsically attractive to students to get involved? I'm sure I can't necessarily see your faces because I'm presenting, but there is a real difficulty, I think, in identifying what motivates students to do more than their assessments. And it doesn't necessarily matter how many times I ask students, I'll always get completely different answers. But what I have found is that those things have to be intrinsically motivated. We can pay students to be our ambassadors through the marketing department, or we can say things like, you know, this will be really good on your CV, but unless they can really show, we can really show them that there is a lifelong learning element and that we're all investing in it, it's not really something that we can motivate them with. So that's hopefully what we'll be doing with these e-portfolios. So this is going to be in 5 steps. Just keep an eye on time, 10 minutes. Yeah, so I'll talk you through the 5 steps, because they definitely, from my perspective as the course leader, where I'm sort of getting all staff to sing off the same hymn sheet with it. But the step 1 is the easiest step, and it's the development of the portfolios. So currently in our context, which is definitely what I'm bound by when I'm sharing this with you, is at level 5, so in year 2, the childhood and youth studies and the early childhood studies students have to go off and do either a 60-hour or a 90-hour placement. And that all culminates in a portfolio that is a Word document that gets submitted to Moodle, turn it in, and then they never have to look at it again because it's part of their assessment. So this year, what we're going to be doing is collating all of that information for their reflective portfolios into an e-portfolio using the medium of Google Sites. Now, for University of Portsmouth staff, and probably Chichester as well, as a Google institution, all students have a Google account, and all of them therefore have access to Google Sites, so they can put this together. And it is an incredibly intuitive platform. I'll show you an example. Please, it's an incredibly juvenile example. It took me about 10 minutes to put together. But this is just what an e-portfolio could look like. So the student's name, maybe the profile of that student, a CV, a personal statement that sits quite nicely in there with their Google Docs. I've laid this e-portfolio out to meet the needs of our specific students, but for transferability across the organisation, this could look any way at all. I think in sciences, it could have maybe, you know, the reports from their lab stuff that they've been doing, or it could have hypotheses and links and different things like that. But what's really important about this is that students can completely personalise it. And so long as they're only sharing it internally or just with an employer, they can put pretty much whatever they want on here in terms of copyright. We don't have any real issues. And I definitely checked with that. We're not, so long as we're not publishing this in the public domain, which is not what students need to do anyway with details of their CV, they can make it look really, really good, which is great. And there's so many different ways that they can lay these out. They can put photographs, they can embed links and things like that. So it can be something that they can be proud of and they can build. And like I said, it can be laid out to suit any course, but it is a record of achievement. So it's not simply an attainment of qualifications. There are so many good Google site tutorials on YouTube, but also I've made a few. So if this was something that you were thinking about, just send me an email and I can send you a couple of the tutorials that I've put together, which is essentially a screencast of how to use the software and how we want students to engage with it. Okay, step 2. So step 1 is the creation of the portfolio and making sure that the students know how to do it. Step 2, and this is certainly something that isn't easy because of workload times and pressures and things like that, but it's get the whole team involved. So for us, the whole teaching team are aware that students are consistently across 3 years of the course building up an e-portfolio. It gets submitted for assessment in year 2, but then it carries on. They can use it whenever because it is a Google site. So if the entire teaching team are motivated to enhance student experience through e-portfolios, it becomes an intrinsic incentive for students. Now, our current associate head of students has invested a lot of time and done some excellent work on a mentoring scheme where students come in year 1 and they're mentored by year 2 students, and it's mitigated a lot of anxiety and worry and settling in for our year 1 students. However, getting those year 2 volunteers was really, really difficult. And I'm sure it's happening university-wide because of pressures with assessments and pressures with time and childcare and all of these different things. However, when we started exposing what the portfolio could do and how it could work, all of a sudden the students said, no, I almost want to make it look better than everybody else's. So I want to put mentoring on mine. I want to have pictures of me doing things with my mentoring. I want to have skills because of the mentoring that I've been doing. And it becomes almost like a little bit of an evidence bank where students take ownership of it to the point where they start banking experiences. And it's not quite as simple for staff to just say, this will look great in your ePortfolio. Instead, it's worth saying things like, right, when you are looking for jobs in the end of year 3, what is it that you can really say that you did over these 3 years? So it helps them with their application, it helps them reflect on their own learning, but ultimately it gives them a thread that runs all the way through, because we currently don't have anything, a thread that runs all the way through that they can just constantly chip away at. But like I said, so step 2 is definitely getting the whole team involved. That's really important. Okay, step 3, this is definitely the most exciting bit for me, is make the most of the digital in the portfolio. Having a Google site is fantastic, but it has so much potential to look very, and I get in trouble for saying this, but look very sexy, so look very attractive to employers. And that sort of can be done in a variety of different ways. Simply writing on it doesn't make it any different than a Word document. However, embedding things like videos, screencasts, online posters, links to social media feeds, Twitter, links to further evidence of professionalism like LinkedIn, blogs, promotional material that they've picked up from the places that they've worked in, it can all of a sudden look incredibly professional when students know how to do a lot of these things anyway. And I build it into my seminar, to show them how to do screencasts, where they are spending a bit of time making a video, showing an academic poster that they've done and explaining it, or putting a photograph with an explanation of their posters, their academic posters of their dissertation proposals. And that all sits within one place, one link, that if an employer saw, they could see an absolute spectrum of things that our students have done on their degrees. I've put just the same example again. I can share this example with you. So again, it's very sort of juvenile, but this is what it could look like. I've just thrown on, and this took 5 minutes. Our students have areas of focus when they write reflective journals, so they're as part of their critical incident. And one student particularly, her area was about ability grouping in a primary school. So what I did is I used that as an example, and I've just embedded a BBC News article in an ePortfolio about should young children be grouped by ability, and almost like a TED talk or a YouTube video about that same topic, to build up a portfolio of evidence of this is what I have been looking at, and almost in simple terms. And then this is my reflection, my academically written reflection about that specific area of focus. So making the most of digital in these ePortfolios, it will look like a professional website. We can have videos of students talking, we can have pictures, photos, blogs, LinkedIn, links to their professional Twitter accounts. We've got students with professional Instagram accounts as well, where they've linked to their professional workplace, and they're allowed to share things about maybe what the students have been doing or the youth group have been doing. So it has real potential in this digital form to take loads of different forms and formats and look really good. So that's definitely a big step in this, is make the most of the digital. And going back to that really strong underpinning piece of evidence, is that ownership of the portfolios is such an important element for continued work on it. If students, and I've seen it happen in front of my eyes in class, students have started to develop their ePortfolios, they've embedded a couple of videos and they almost get a little bit addicted to it, like, well, that will look better if I go and do a couple of weeks of mentoring. That will look better if I find a blog that I really do appreciate in terms of educational professionalism, and I embed that in and write a reflection about it. It becomes quite something for students to be incredibly proud of. Step 3 then is facilitate continued employability enhancement through personal tutors. Now, again, from a course leader perspective, this is something that is pressure, is the student survey, which is I've received advice and guidance on job opportunities and careers, or I'm aware of opportunities for work experience. So what we did for this is we embedded in the professional portfolio a futures section, where instead of getting students to write skills audits and maybe find things that they might specifically want in the future, we got students to start reflecting on the processes that they'd been to enhance their employability. Now, I know we've got someone in this webinar who works in employability, and we've got an employability team, and they're always saying to me, I want to see your students more. You know, we advertise our services and we come into lectures, but we don't really see those students. So I've incentivized that by putting a section in the ePortfolio that allows students to reflect on what they're doing to enhance their employability prospects. So it could be going to a careers fair and summarising it into 5 points that they feel like they've learned from that careers fair, or embedding in their ePortfolio maybe courses or further employment enhancers. A good example for us is paediatric first aid. What I often like to do is say to my students, right, if there was a child in this room right now and that child was choking, how many of you could do something about that? And it ends up sort of students sort of thinking, oh, I'd quite like to be that person who could do something about that. So we then advertise sort of courses. There are some really good online safeguarding courses that our lecturers in the department can facilitate through external sources. And we give them all of these things that they can reflect about in their futures and start building up these bolt-on qualifications at the same time as doing their degree. The other good thing about the futures section is that I would absolutely hate the fact that, well, I do hate the fact that students don't see job adverts, or they don't see job specifications that they want to go for until the end of year 3. Because it's all of a sudden there's this big surprise. I didn't realise that I needed to have done this. I didn't realise that maybe I needed to have this qualification or be aware of that. So having this futures section and constantly keeping their hand in with, these are potential jobs I might like, and this is the sort of skill that I need to do them, is quite important. I always say we don't want any surprises with employability. And I know that some of our students come onto the degree because they genuinely want to enhance their understanding of working with children and young people. But for a large amount of our students, they are coming to enhance their career prospects. So that's really important for step 4. And then finally, and this has definitely been influenced by the Bett 2020 in January up in the London Excel, is that putting our graduates into a digital economy is all well and good when we're saying, yes, I can do this, I can do that. But what graduates aren't doing is showing employers that they have these skills. Now, the ePortfolio will exist as one link. So it can be embedded in a personal statement. It can be embedded on a CV. So if CVs are being emailed for jobs and the ePortfolio is there as a link, it's a really nice way for employers to choose the level of engagement that they have with that ePortfolio, because some of them are going to be really big, really rich pieces of information that what we could do is just simply share the link and say, this is my ePortfolio if it's something that you want to look at for further information about me. The other thing that is really quite fantastic is that one college, I think it was in the north of England, is encouraging their students to turn their ePortfolio links into QR codes. I've put one on the slide. Turn it into QR codes and put it onto a business card. So that business card has the student's name, has the student's email address and contact telephone number, and on the back you can actually use your phone, a smartphone, to scan the back of that business card, and it brings up their ePortfolio in a mobile desktop format, which for me, I think that shows just an unbelievable amount of digital skill, digital understanding to be able to communicate your whole CV, your whole professional experience just by using a business card and a QR code, which for me was really, really cool. Because yes, you could put the link to your ePortfolio on your business card, but then people then need to type that out. Whereas that quick scan can show that students really have got that edge, which I love. Because in speaking to a couple of employers, I know one from the Active Communities Network that employs a lot of our students, I told him about this idea and he said, I've never had an applicant who came to me with a link to an ePortfolio that would be that well reflected upon and that well populated, but also to have a QR code link would really impress me. Those were his words. So that's quite an interesting way. So step 5 is definitely how we get students to share those ePortfolios. But once the link exists, any edits will be automatically updated. So there's no need for reprints. Like with a Word document, if you print it out and hand it out, as soon as that needs updating, it needs retracting, reprinting and sending. Whereas the students will just be able to edit, and it will change it live in that link. Now, the only thing that we need to think about is when students' Google accounts go dormant, they'll still be able to access that link when they leave, but they won't be able to edit it. So that's something that we need to think about for the future. Other institutions have made it so that they can just take the Google site with them and put it into a different format. So that's something that we need to work on with this. But so long as they are a student at the university, they can build, share, and if they get to the end of year 3 and they can finish it, they can still take it with them and take the information from it. It's just those last edits. That's the only tricky thing. So that's it then. So this is what we've done today. I think the most important thing to take from this is the transferability of practice. I know that my context is incredibly specific in that we have work placements built into the course because it's so vocational, and that we have a lot of reflective work because our student success is built upon building relationships and working with children and young people. So it is very specific. But really thinking about that transferability of practice and the way that the portfolio could be laid out to best represent your students, I think is quite important. Oh, that's it. So that's me done. Sorry if I have spoken at a rate of absolute knots. It's just something I'm really passionate about. So I might get a little bit quick sometimes. So thank you very much. If I stop sharing my screen and come back to this, I see.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. Significant degree of transferability. I must admit, I did something similar when I was at Chai in the business school at level 6, and we actually used to get the students had to build for a level 6 module. They had to apply for a job. They went on placement as part of that, but then we asked them to develop an artifact, and that artifact would show how your degree has evolved over 3 years. And we weren't Google, so they did it in they did it in Wix.
Oh yeah, Wix, the blogging site, yes.
But exactly the same. And then they started kind of like videoing themselves, put the videos on YouTube, and then we're embedding the videos into the Wix as well to offer that reflection around the artifact. So it's a really great tool, and I think we're using Google Sites is so intuitive to use. I think it's great. It's a lovely example of practice that other colleagues could use. Colleagues, we have time. Would anybody like to ask Jodie any questions? Please unmute and just drop in if you'd like.
Julie,
ask how do you assess it?
Okay, for the actual assessment of it, it's the critical incident that they write. So it's a 1,500 word as part of their placement. It's a 1,500 word reflective piece, and that's what gets rigorously assessed, and it has to come in through Turnitin as well as be embedded in their ePortfolio. And they do get a lot of formative feedback surrounding the whole portfolio as well, but that is the only real summative bit. I think assessing it in terms of their images look better than your images is not something we're ever going to do, because we really need to give ownership to them. So the reflective writing is what we actually summatively assess, because then it's obviously links to their academic and undergraduate competencies. But in terms of receiving it as an assessment, they just get a lot of feedback saying, this is brilliant, have you thought about this, have you thought about that, really.
Okay. That's really good. We do a similar idea in terms of the coursework in the second year as well. So this would be great. And I looked at the portfolio that the university had before, but it was really clunky. So this would be a really good one to try out, perhaps.
Brilliant. Oh, I'm glad. I'd love to see it as well. If you do have any examples that are really good, I'd love to see. I mean, obviously taking names out and getting permission, I really would love to see them and see how people run with them. It would be brilliant. Pat, you're right, Pat. Yeah, I can't really see everyone. Yeah.
It's very informative. Thank you. Actually, in the previous institution where I worked, we have a program. It's a food science and engineering program, and the students used to prepare the portfolio. It's called a Mahara. They use Mahara platform, and obviously they need to create, the ice cream or new food, and they include all the information in their portfolio. And most of the students, they got job. So they, during the interview time, mostly they were employed in food industry. So in industries, they presented their case. It's very nicely. Most of them, they're all almost like 100% employment, and that enhanced the clearly this ePortfolio is the best way forward for employability. Thank you.
And I think as well, to add to that, is that when I came into the university, there wasn't anything happening. We were ticking a lot of employability boxes, but we weren't having that real lifelong, this is something that you want to continue to build upon. But what I really want to hammer home from our perspective is that the sharing of the portfolios through a QR code or through a link or through a really inventive way is actually quite powerful, because what some students were thinking of doing as well is a really quick YouTube, Andy, like you mentioned, a really quick YouTube clip of, hi, my name is Jodie Pennell, this is me, this is my background. If you click the link in the description, that's my ePortfolio, and sharing the link to the video with and having these really personalized, almost in your face, I'm digitally literate, please employ me, sort of think that which is what we're looking for. Yeah, definitely. And
Thank you. Thank you.
no, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Anybody got any other questions?
I have, but I don't want to keep.
Julie, go on. Thanks. Go on, kick in. That's fine.
So when the students have got their ePortfolio and they give the link to the employer, I guess it shows the employer absolutely everything. So I was sort of thinking that where they have the section for their futures and they're putting in ideas of things that they might like to do they just need to tidy that up before they share it with the employer, or is there a way that they could sort of exclude the employer from being able to see that bit?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there are a couple of different ways they can do it. It looks a little bit clunky if they just change the permissions on that section to not be able to see, because you can see the sections there, but you can't see the documents in it. But what you can do in Google Drive, and I was playing with this with one of my PGCE students in my last job, is they only needed probably about 80% of their ePortfolio, and a lot of it they didn't want to be shown because, it says things like, I've always wanted to do this, and the job that they were going for was not that. So what they did is, in their Google Drive, they simply right-clicked, made a copy of the site, so they had two, and it duplicates it perfectly, exactly everything, made a copy, and then just deleted those two sections. So they had their original that's almost acted as a master, and they just right-clicked, made a copy, and then just tailored it to every job that they went for. And yeah, so and I think what surprised me so much about this is that this idea started incredibly conceptually a couple of years ago. It built up, and the real learning has come from what the students have chosen to do with it, which has been astounding. Like, they said, and they say things so casually, like, just right click, make a copy, delete what you don't want, and send that. And then they put their bag on their shoulder and then they leave. And you go, that's fantastic. That's a really good idea. Well done. Oh, fantastic. So I think the learning definitely comes the other way around. The students say, Jodie, why don't you just do this? And you go, well, hang on, let me just write it down. Ooh,
yeah. Okay, yeah, no, that's a really good idea. Thank you.
Do you have specific sort of points through the course where you're saying to tutors, could you sort of have something in your module where you're going to go back to the ePortfolio? So I know you're saying sign up for the mentoring, that would look great because you can put this on your portfolio, but are there also touch points maybe within modules, or is it a sort of holistic process?
Yeah, I think this COVID-19 sort of situation has made me reflect a lot on the changes in assessments, and one of my colleagues has decided that they want to change one of the assessments to looking at case studies. Students have to choose a case study that links closely to their placement and then reflect on that case study about children's behaviour in one of their child psychology modules in year 3. So I've then said to her, brilliant, now I want them to add that into their ePortfolio because it's a professional case study. So I think it's about, and I know I'm speaking from my experience as the course leader. I can see everybody's changes in their course, so I can see where it can fit in. But I think it's definitely about grabbing hold of those opportunities and saying, right, this can fit into that. And I know that we're very vocational. So in terms of the mentoring, one of our colleagues, is teaching social minds at the moment, and a lot of the mentoring stuff crosses over with that. So she's pulling a lot of stuff out of that, saying, right, this links really well to this. And students, it's so easy for them. All they're doing is taking parts of their assessment and cutting and pasting them into their ePortfolios. So it's no extra work. It's just putting them in or embedding the document or something. But it is definitely about doing it. I think we might try the sort of really routine dipping dipping in at this point of the year, dipping in at that point of the year, and seeing if that works.
Linked to that was a question around, because we're doing something similar with a new employability module that we're starting at level 4 for our students, and we're going to have one of these portfolios, and some of your ideas and suggestions are fantastic. But I'm also wondering, how important are those touch points with the personal tutor? So is it also a question of that intrinsic motivation, but also having something tangible that prompts those conversations with personal tutors, that somebody's interested in me and somebody's helping me to make sense of some of this?
And that step 2 of getting the whole team involved is probably the most challenging thing, you know, where if a student comes in and they're having a tutor conversation and it is about something like a real pastoral issue, getting don't forget your ePortfolio is really difficult. So it is, yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, I don't know, really, it is a real challenge. I think getting all tutors to sing off the same hymn sheet is so important.
That's a perennial challenge across the piece, isn't it?
And it always will be. Is, you know, we've all got so many things going on and people are swamped, especially at the moment, to mention it. And I can even see myself waving a student off and going, oh, do you know, I didn't even ask. So yeah, a real challenge. I'm sorry, I haven't got really anything to mitigate it. Yeah, a real challenge at this point. It will be ongoing, I think.
Yeah. Chip in, sorry. So I had the same problem. So I'm the employability lead for the department, and for years I've had real trouble getting the tutors involved. But what we've done now is for the tutorial program, we've flipped it around. So it's mainly based around employability. So every week that they meet, they have an employability activity that they do. So basically all of the things that I couldn't fit into the lectures, sort of like the smaller things that need maybe small group or one-to-one, I've put into the tutorials. So it could be that you could embed that perhaps in the tutorials.
Do you have, is that as part of an employability module then, or?
It is now. It didn't used to be. The tutorials used to be sort of more traditional academic stuff, if you like. But I asked kindly, please, could I have the tutorials as well? And they do still have some sort of more academic-y stuff, but most of it is based around the employability. And yeah, it's sort of taken as part of the module now as well. Tutors engage better with that, because I think they had a program I wrote out, this is what you need to do, step 1, step 2, step 3, and they've really sort of engaged with that now. But don't ask them to check CVs because they don't like that.
Julie, that's a really good one. It's almost like having a crib sheet for especially one-on-one tutorials. Just make sure you touch base about X, Y, and Z, and that's the crib sheet's been really helpful for us. It doesn't necessarily mean that all tutors have the time or the inclination to use it, but it has helped almost like a tutorial checklist. Please look at these things. So the ePortfolio could be embedded as part of that, I think.
Yeah.
And also, this doesn't necessarily play to the natural strengths and interests of every academic. So I think that's the real challenge, isn't it? That actually they're not necessarily, not because they don't want to, but they're not always confident actually to engage in these kind of conversations. So I think the crib sheets help there as well.
And a little bit of an organic sort of outcome of it, which I found quite funny, is that students ended up, because of the ownership element of it, students ended up sort of doing a little bit of my dad's bigger than your dad with their ePortfolios. Like, I've put this in mine. Have you? And then of course students, well, an element of competitiveness. I'm going to make sure that I do. And so there is a sort of a little bit of peer development that happens a bit of organically. So, but that's quite good. And then towards the end of the year, we end up with some people that have really engaged and some people that have got the bare bones of what they needed to be assessed for. And I think that's the nature. That's going to be the nature of the game with it.
We have something similar with we do brand me presentations, and we had something really similar. So they're working on them in class individually, but every time they stand up to present them 3 or 4 times in the year, there's that little bit of competition with myself. So I want to be better than John, but I want to be better than I was last time round. And then you do listen to John and you think, oh, I like what he did there, and maybe I could do something. And that is the magic. I think if you can, like you seem to have done that with your portfolios, once you've harnessed whatever magic that is that's happening there, that's when it really flies, I think.
And going back to that intrinsic, it's definitely better to be in competition with yourself. I want it to look so much better than it did 4 months ago. I want it to look better now. It's so much better than there's this, because they end up sort of making it quite like a good practice pinch, like a borrowing thing, as opposed to, because they're not necessarily competing for jobs, because the spectrum of jobs that they go into for our guys is so wide. They're not all going for the same position. So yeah, they can work together quite nicely, which is good.
I've got a bit of a grumpy traditional left-wing academic question, but honestly, I'm here, and thank you very much for the presentation, and it's lots to think about. Basically, from the context of this question is that I teach on a film production module, but I'm the sort of resident theorist, historian person, so I've got no practical experience in the industry, and I'm so some of the questions we're talking about, sort of expertise is a problem when I'm asked to think about employability. But the other thing I struggle with is that actually, I think the industry that we are teaching our students to get into needs radical reform and changing, and it's been in the media a lot. So particularly with one of the university's research themes is democratic citizenship, and one of the broader things we need to be doing is preparing our students to be self-critical, compassionate, human beings. Quite often the advice we need to give them for them to get their first runner job, I think, can conflict with that responsibility, and that you're basically trying to teach them values that I'm not comfortable teaching them. So I don't know, this is, I guess, just a broader starter question and a discussion, but I'd be interested in, Jodie, if you've had any problems with either staff members or had to wrestle with the desire to make students self-critical and sort of thinking human beings versus the desire to do things because your employers will want you to do them.
Yeah, and I can see from your perspective as well, the battle that you're having is really interesting to communicate to students because of their standpoint as well. I think for us, we can mitigate a lot of these things simply by the reflective nature of it and allowing them to reflect in whatever way that they feel. I mean, sometimes, and it's almost something that we've got to mitigate. Students will reflect on a situation that's happened in their professional workplace by saying that they felt like the professionals in that workplace were completely negligent, and they didn't like this, they didn't like that. And although we need to get them to write very objectively and very about the place, it's allowing that almost freedom of reflection for them to do that. Because I can see if you were to get some incredibly standardized robot ePortfolios enhancing the view of an industry that you don't necessarily feel it needs radical reform, it will probably professionally destroy you a little bit to be reading them all, like, oh my goodness. So I think having that real
I get in a position where I'm reading what I would say is an effective CV to get in a job, but a potentially awful human being produced in result, to be dramatic about it.
Yeah, and I think being able to embed those conversations, especially if students can embed things like blogs and videos, if they could almost show their ePortfolio as having a balanced discussion about these ideas to acknowledge them, that might have a lot more reflective power than simply enhancing professionalism for the sake of skills we need to tick off for these jobs. And it links to the undergraduate competencies as well, I think.
Sure.
Just jump in there as well. I think that's a really a valid point. I think one of the things we always struggled with is, when we ask students to start writing artifacts and reflecting on their experiences, they're really bad at reflection. It's something that doesn't come naturally. They find it really hard. And we got there eventually. I think one of the things we always did was try to understand, because my background is kind of like tourism management, destination management. So the jobs for students are always applying for, we made them apply for a destination management job. They had to come up and do a CV and an interview for, I think it was tourism director on St. Helena was the last one I think we did before we left. But they also then had to do a professional practice piece. And what we were encouraging them to do was track their experiences around job specifications. So they understood the nature of the jobs that were there, and so could learn to write what they were doing against the expectation of an employer in terms of what they'd be expecting at that point. But it's horses for courses. And again, an ePortfolio for one thing, an assessment is a little bit different to perhaps a reflective piece. So it's just reflecting, I think, sometimes the learning outcome of this type of activity and what you want it to do, but also contributing this wider agenda around getting students to be slightly more critical of their own career pathways and what it is they actually need to be doing. And I think visual approaches where they're constantly doing it. And I'll tell you something, Judy, the other thing you've given me today is I think this is a fantastic vehicle for fellowship claims. Because at the moment, with my Apex hat on, I'm asking everybody to write 3,000 words. And it's like, when we're encouraging students to be creative, I think I'd like to do something like this and say to staff, right, you can write 3,000 words, or you can do a portfolio and hand that in instead. So I think it's got a lot of transferability.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay. I know, Andy, you're gonna have to shoot off soon, aren't you? Is there anything else just before we ring off? Thanks everyone for coming.
I have another one.
No worries. Have you got to go, Julie? No worries.
No, I've got another question. I'm sorry.
Okay, I didn't. That's good. But you were going. Bye, everyone. Yeah, lovely. No, it's okay.
I just wondered how you got the first years to engage with it. If they weren't actually doing it for their assessment, how did you sort of pique their interest around doing it?
To be fair, with the first years, I think especially with this specific situation, we've had a lot of anxiety surrounding it. So it's kind of been left with them. I'll have to answer that question next year. But with the ones that are really interested, it's almost like I've been telling them what's been really interesting this year. Put it into a Google site, because they are familiar with Google sites from a couple of different sort of elements. So put it into a Google site and call it your ePortfolio, so that when they start in year 2, they'll have a couple of notes that they'll look back and go, okay, I don't know why this is in here, but then hopefully then it can be put into some sort of context. What I find with year 1 is that any mark that they get that's higher than the other mark, no, it doesn't really matter what it is, they put it in. So anything that they got at 40, forget, but anything that's sort of maybe a 2, even if it's a 500-word article review, it's in there. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's really relevant, but they put it in. So yeah, I'll have to stay tuned on that with year 1.
That's okay. Thank you.
No worries. Is there any other questions? Okay, lovely. Well, thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Go and put the kettle on. And we'll see you. And Andy's saying thank you for everyone.
No, thank you, everybody, for coming. We're doing more. Can I just, again, we've academic events .port.ac.uk. We've got some new URLs, so it's academic events .port.ac.uk. There's more webinars coming. We're trying to maintain this. If anybody would like to offer to do something around what they're doing, please contact me directly. But we are maintaining a program all the way through the summer, and there's going to be a lot more kind of like tail related stuff coming as part of the university's drive to make sure everybody is ready for September, because I think we will be doing it online. Jodie, can I say a massive thank you? Really interesting, highly transferable, but it's also really lovely when we've been chatting a lot to see somebody that is so passionate about what they're doing. You are so with it and engaged in it. Your students are really lucky. So thank you for sharing it with us. It was really informative, and I appreciate your time very much indeed.
Thank you. I'll send you my slides, Andy, if that's okay.
We'll get it all online, everybody, and we will send that. We'll send that round. And again, that'll be the same for all the others we're doing. Okay.
That's lovely. All right. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, everybody. Thank you ever so much, Judy.
Bye. Bye.